So what I was going to show you, today's program is going to be Dovetails, and my contribution to it is going to be using a jig and routers and so forth. Since I don't have one of those elaborate jigs with the moving fingers and all that kind of thing, I elected to go with the old standby that I've got here, which is the Porter cable fixed jig system. Anyway, the whole reason behind doing Dovetails is this this kind of a system develops a really strong joint, and within the furniture making industry, what'll wind up happening is once you get one of these things properly assembled and so forth, like this, if this were a drawer front, the idea is that you cannot pull that thing through. I mean, there's no glue on this thing yet, but in the meantime, you can still get it apart. Now, to begin the thought process on how to go about doing this, this jig will do, a number of different sizes and materials to create dovetails. But the layout process begins with your blank. You got to decide on how thick the material is, whether you're going to do through dovetails like these. The cabinet industry likes to use half-blind dovetails because they're faster, they're easier to set up.
Bob, is it possible to turn that front light off or
We'll
see what you got a little bit?
try and give them that. Is that any better?
I took some of the glare off, if you can see.
Okay, yeah, I can see fine.
So what's a half blind?
Let's see, yeah, I've got an example of it here. I'll pass this one around. I don't know if I can get this thing apart so you can see the components of it. Perhaps somebody that's got two good hands can do that there. I don't want to take it entirely apart, just kind of expose it a little bit so you can look around it.
It's pretty stuck pretty good.
Nothing too tight.
Yep.
Sure good.
Yeah, let's go down here and see if we can modify this thing a little bit here. This will expose enough of the wood on this thing so you can see how it works.
That's what is known as a good fit, right, Bob?
Yeah. The other nifty thing about the half blinds is you only need one router and one bit to be able to execute those, and you can do the whole thing in one pass. With the through dovetails, you need to, in order to make it faster and more repeatable, it's easiest to do with two routers, two bits naturally, and two different adapters that go in there to protect the jig. Okay, back to the material selection and choice. What they recommend for use with this machine is that your choices for the width of the wood, optimum is integer number of inches plus a quarter. The main reason for that choice is that this half pin out here on the end will wind up being a suitable size that it's appealing. If you go with a lesser dimension, such as a quarter, for example, you can see that this pin is going to be, half that width. If you want to get really brave and try a width like 6 1/8, okay, there's not going to be much material left out here. So you're probably going to break one somewhere in the process. Okay, I think for this demo, I believe I chose 5 1/4 for the dimension on this thing. Yep. The best way to get started on one of these things is once you decide on the width of the wood, you now need to determine the thickness. Since I went the quick and dirty route, I went down to Home Depot and picked up some of their hobby wood, which is already planed to thickness. But if you're going to do your own and you choose a 1/2 inch thickness, what you want to do is plane everything that you're going to make drawers out of, where you're going to use this jig, plane it all at once. Run the whole batch of it. Figure out how much wood you're going to use, because you don't want to try using this particular jig with several different thicknesses of wood. Otherwise, you're going to spend most of your time adjusting this thing. The other thing that I would recommend doing too is once you get the wood prepped there, you then decide on your length and width. Go ahead and cut those blanks to size. I decided for the purposes of this demo that we're going to use, I think it was something like 11 1/2 inch blanks. So I cut a whole bunch of these to 11 1/2. Now when I'm doing drawers, what I will go ahead and do is once I've got these things cut to this stage, I will go ahead and finish them. You know, if you're going to put a stain on them, if you're going to put lacquer or something like that, you go ahead and completely finish them at this point, because once you cut the router bit, you're going to expose new wood, and that's going to be your glue surface, and that way you don't need to worry about getting a gun down inside some cavity that's really tough to get to. Any questions so far? Have I lost anybody? Okay. Okay, now then it comes to the point of making the adjustments on here. The first thing they recommend that you do is you set up this finger system. So what I'm going to do here is flip this thing around to the tail side first. That's what they recommend that you cut first with this. Now then, what you want to do is have one of your pieces of wood that is a known proper thickness. Install a scrap of that on each end, so that once you drop this plate in place, that it's level. So go ahead and just set that down. You're going to make some adjustments on it later. The other thing that's a really good idea to do is to go ahead and label what is the inside of these boards. If you're shooting for appearance or something like that, what you want to do is just take a pencil, or a lot of cases I just use white chalk, and mark that this is inside and which end is which is going to receive the tails, which is going to receive the pins. Okay, once you've got this gauge set up, you slide your board up and in place. You then adjust this clamp system on here, so when you operate this arm, you're now holding this board flat up against this jig. Now
Guides.
Yeah, that's what I was going to show you, how to adjust that next. The while you're on that topic there, Jerry, there's a guide right here. Since I've already got this one adjusted to save time, we'll go ahead and move the one that I'm not going to adjust, just to see that it is there and it moves. I'm not sure if Dan can get a good shot of this. The guide that he was questioning is this one here that moves side to side. Now on the surface you start asking, well, what do I need that for? And I'm going to show you. What needs to happen here is that this edge of this board and this edge of this board need to be the same distance to the sides of the jig in order for this thing to work properly. I mean, you can creep up on it by making multiple adjustments and test cuts and so forth, but what I prefer to use is a dial caliper or a caliper here. I measure this side, tells me it's 0.282. Measure this side over here, it's 256, so something has moved a little bit here, but since I've already produced some dovetails here, I'm not going to mess with it. Maybe I had a bad reading here. Yeah, it was a bad reading that I had there. So this side is 283, this side is 282. I think we'll beg forgiveness from Ken Kline, I mean from Ken Vickery, and maybe he'll let us pass on that. We'll say a few Hail Marys and we'll let it go. If it were not set to the same, what you would do is tap this thing a little bit to adjust it side to side. Then once you get the two of these things equidistant, then you would slide this this stop up to the edge of the board.
Dan, is there any way you can show the corner of that board and that guide up there?
See if you can get down in
When we try
there.
to turn the light back on, it's the picture's awfully grainy with as dark as it is.
It looks good out here, doesn't it?
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
We can see it without that glare. Okay, thank you.
But
You
what-
got both bit boards at the same time?
No. No, with a through dovetail, you're cutting them one at a time.
Have to flip the jig.
This piece here, what I didn't show you is it's prominently marked scrap for a reason, and that is just strictly to back up the cut that we're going to make in here.
So you don't get tear out.
Yeah, so you don't get tear out, because otherwise it'll side of the board when the router bit gets back there. So what you're doing is you're setting that stop on that side. You want to maintain some pressure against it, tighten it up, and then cinch it down real hard.
Just
So
using that as an example, you got the same
Yeah.
stop as over here on this side.
same exact stop over here. I would imagine this. They probably engineered two stops into this thing so that if you had two different thicknesses of wood or something like that, you could decide whether you're going to use a left side or a right side, or it could be for those like Jim that are left-handed. They may feel more comfortable using the other side.
That piece you adjusted, does it have a long arm that goes over to the edge of the board, or what?
Yes. Yeah, let me go ahead and pop this part out of here. I don't know. Well, let's see. Yeah, I know how we do this. Get that out of there so Dan can get a real good shot of that piece.
That's the left side.
Yep. So what you do is you're adjusting that arm so that this piece that goes in the top would rest against that and come out here. But on a through dovetail, you don't use the top portion for anything. You only use that for the half blind dovetails. On the through dovetails, all the cutting is done on the front. Now the other thing that you got to factor into this, it's kind of like doing miters and so forth. You mark the thing, and then when you take it over the chop saw, you gotta start thinking to yourself, okay, let's see, how do I turn this thing? Which way am I going to cut this? With this thing, what you got to keep in mind is that the inside of the drawer is always going to be facing you. So you put the outside of the drawer against the face of the tool. So if we're going to be cutting tails, we'll go ahead and raise that thing up so it's to the top of the bar and registered all the way to the left against that stop. And then tighten this thing down. If Dan can get a a shot down in this region here, what you'll see is you got a big space in there. If I go running a router bit into there, as that router bit begins to emerge on the other side, unless it's backed up by something, you're going to get a whole lot of blowout. So what you do instead to solve that one is you put this backer right up against it and you cinch it down so it doesn't move. And that is one of the things that I frequently forget to do, is tighten this thing down enough as you're busy cutting away and so forth. All of a sudden you hear something that sounds funny and you realize that this board has slipped out the back. I mean, you're so focused and concentrated on what you're doing here, you fail to see that thing in your peripheral vision move. Okay,
what's the numbers you have on top of your jig there?
Okay.
250 and I don't know
Yep.
what the other one is.
The 250 is the thickness of the jig.
Okay.
I use that to assist my calculations. That's going to be one of the next topics. You make a good straight man on that. When you go to set your router bit depth on either of your bits, you know, it needs to be enough, but not too much. So to get a good starting point, what I do is I will precisely measure the thickness of your blank. Which in this case, whoops, it's a different piece than what I intended to measure, I believe. I guess it was right. So the thickness of the blank is 503. Yep. And part of why I like to use this piece of melamine to clamp everything down on, in addition to, you know, providing easy access for this jig, is I got a nice surface to write on. So I take a pencil and add up the numbers here. So I do the 503, which is the thickness of the material, and the 250 for the thickness of the jig itself. And that's the starting point that I use for the router bit. So it winds up being around 880, something like that. We'll see what I wound up with there.
Where'd you get that jig, Bob?
Right out here. Yep. It looks like I had set a starting point on these jigs to 696. So my math was off a little bit there. So I will set the starting point there. Then you proceed to start making a test cut, and then it's when you start making minor adjustments and tweaks. But that'll get you close. That'll get you in the ballpark and save a bunch of noise, dust, and scrap.
Bob, I've got one of these jigs at home, and I've read a little bit of the directions on it, and I never used it. It seems to me like I remember this being a setting here to adjust your router down.
Mm-hmm. Since I got this thing from a questionable source, like free, I wasn't sure what those things had been set to. So that was why I came up with this system here. But
They're adjustable anyway.
Yeah, they are adjustable.
What you do is you put a thickness of board in there to set your.
Oh, is that? Oh, okay. Oh, we have an aha moment here.
Gauge,
Yep.
put your
Then
board
you've
in
already
there.
compensated for the
Yep.
thickness of the jig.
I knew I kept you around for a reason, Jerry. Yeah, what he's talking about is this thing here.
There's a little stop. It's hard to
Yep.
see from here, but there's a stop underneath that
Yep.
slot that you use to set your router.
I had not.
What?
Is that just for measurement?
Yeah, well, for you to put the bit down to the right depth to cut your,
Yeah, you just set the router down on there and take the bit down to that stopper there.
whatever that stop's set to, you
Yeah.
adjust the bit so it touches that stop, and then you got the right setting. You don't have to measure anything.
Makes sense.
Looks like it's got to take a whole lot more adjustment than what I
That's
did
okay,
there.
but I mean,
Yeah.
you just use the thickness of the board to set that depth.
Right.
And then you set your router bit to that depth, and then you got it.
I had not encountered that part of it in the book. It just says to use that. It doesn't say how to adjust it.
That prevents you from having to make all those measurements and
Yep.
calculations.
Well, I usually keep instruments like this close by anyway, and it's fast.
Yeah, so there you go. That's your thickness there now. So
I'm
now
an
you're right
engineer,
over
but
it.
I don't have to measure things if I don't have to.
Okay.
Too much work on Jerry.
Yep.
Oh, it's not that, that's just so much simpler.
Actually, it's only measure twice and do the math 3 times.
Yeah. Okay, then we've got the depth set of the router bits. We now learned something new about this. Now what you need to do is figure out where to put this this gauge on here. And what they tell you in the book is to take advantage of these lines. Now this is one of the places where measurements aren't going to do you a whole lot of good. Take some test cuts to do it. But there's a line scored into the guide here, down here, you know, each one of these fingers all the way along. So what I usually do is I will get this thing adjusted so that it matches the intersection of this joint here. You try to do whatever you can to keep it parallel. So otherwise, if it's skewed one way or the other, you're going to get less than desirable results.
And that's adjusted by the
Well, that's adjusted by moving these stops down here and these lockdowns. So if you need to move this thing this way a little bit, you back this stop off a few times. And I use the same number of turns on the other side to try to keep it parallel. Then once you
Eyeball that.
yeah, this one's an eyeball. If you get really anal about the thing, you can then use one of these gauges here to get close by measuring the front edge of the stop or the gauge to the frame of the dovetail jig, and get it close to the same thing on the other side. So that'll just ascertain that you're within 10 or 20 thousandths of it. You know, if you're off by, an 1/8 of an inch or something like that, you probably want to do something about it.
You also want to make sure that board is flat, not bowed in any way, because the clamp will flatten it out.
Yeah.
So once you cut your dovetails, it goes back. You got an issue.
Okay, so once you get that part, you're about ready to cut some tails. What they recommend that you do is put these bushings in your router. Porter Cable sells, when you buy this, a set of bushings come with it. If you didn't happen to get the bushings with it, Porter Cable also sells a set of bushings. Any one of those will work. For people who have not used routers equipped with bushings before, Dan can get a shot of this knurled nut down inside here. That knurled nut is what holds the bushing in place. This thing will do the vibration and use and so forth. This thing frequently backs off, whereupon that thing will start flopping around, and then mysteriously you're busy working along and all of a sudden that bushing will just flat fall out. And what that does is that then exposes this 7-degree dovetail bit, and you will proceed to chew up your guide.
Ask me how I know.
Yeah. Well, I got.
Actually, if you don't have two routers, you have to keep switching the bits and the
Yep.
bushing. And I
When
had
I-
that situation, and I forgot to put the right bushing on.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I see aluminum chips going here.
Yeah.
Oh, hell. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, when I-
Replacements, but
When I first got this free jig, when I took it out of the box, I proceeded to notice this divot missing out of this one. So I proceeded to get a replacement for that dude.
Yeah, I cut bigger gallons than that.
I could imagine you would.
Can you use that plumber thread tape to have that ring on there?
Well, actually, the solution that Porter Cable came up with for the thing, after these things had been out for some time, they finally introduced this really slick solution, which I found out works just as well, to go down to Ace Hardware down there and get a plumbing O-ring and put that thing on the back side of that bushing, so that when you insert the bushing on there, then you slip that O-ring on top of there, tighten that knurled nut down, and it won't come loose. So it's good.
Do you have to center your bushing and make sure it's centered?
Yeah. Yeah, that's another fairly common occurrence. Fortunately, I haven't had that problem with this set of routers, but they do also make a centering tool that's right handy that will go down inside the collet. It's basically a cone arrangement that you jam that thing down in there. That'll center that bushing, and then you tighten up that knurled nut, and then pull this alignment tool out.
So that O-ring you're talking about be between the knurled nut and the bottom of the plate there?
Yes, sir. Yep. So since I discovered that, one of the Porter Cable guys told me about that little trick. I went down to Ace Hardware and bought me a half dozen of those little bushings, and those O-rings, and threw them in with my box of bushings.
What size did you get, Bob?
I don't recall. I just took a bushing down there and just kept trial and error fitting it until I found one that worked.
But that hardware store is not there anymore.
Yeah.
I think I got a set of bushings like that, and that has a wavy washer that you put in there.
Really?
Use that? You heard of it?
That would probably accomplish the same
There's a
thing.
wavy washer you put in there between instead of where that O-ring would be, and I haven't used it that much. So.
What brand router do you have?
Well, I got the bushing set out here. It was one of their East specials they had a while back.
Because the mine has older setups, you can get it here.
Oh.
Yeah, most of why you see all this Porter Cable stuff here is a number of years back. I had quite an arrangement going with Porter Cable when we were over at Kentech. They smiled on me and let me have all kinds of magical tools here. And also offered all kinds of tech support. About once a year I'd get a visit from either them or the DeWalt people, where they'd find out what kind of new things I was interested in. Okay, now then, armed with all that setting stuff, we still haven't made any sawdust. I'm sure if Ken were doing this, we would have had sawdust by now. Keep an eye on the time. Short Ken on any time here.
Do you need to lay down or?
No. One of the good things about doing this thing is you really don't need to be able to even see what you're doing once you have all this stuff adjusted and set. Get Dan to a place that he likes here. We're now almost ready to start cutting some stuff here.
That don't have a depth stop on it, and
You mean a dead man switch?
there's something to keep the router from going in too far.
The template is what does that.
Yeah, the bushing here goes against
Bushing with the
template.
template.
Yeah.
You can only push it in so far. It won't go anywhere.
Also, that bar, mine,
To
set it so
To answer your question there, what happens is this bushing is an exact fit for this slot. Can't go anywhere else, and once you get to the edge of the bushing, against this back of this slot, you're done. So we're going to go ahead and cut these tails here. Yeah, as you can see from this, I think Ken's method is probably a lot neater in this regard.
It's the sound every engineer likes to hear. 30,000 RPM router.
Yeah.
You don't have to go from side to side in there. It goes straight in and straight out, right?
Straight in and straight out with this one.
Yeah,
You do need the next step we're going to do is going to require a little side to side effort.
Don't pick your router straight up when you're.
absolutely not.
Right.
It's still
Yeah, with this one you got a 7-degree bit in there. So if you go trying to lift that dude up, you're gonna wind up wrecking your joint.
just go straight in and straight out. Wait till the routers stop before you do anything else.
Yep.
You didn't mention locking your router. It's adjustable.
Yes.
Remember to lock it. It's really exciting when you
Yeah.
move it.
That's an understatement.
What's also exciting about one of these things is if you forget to tighten that collet nut,
No,
these things will tend to become ballistic. Don't ask me how I know that.
we don't want a router coming out of there.
Yeah.
Okay, the next.
He's talking about adjusting my interface. He said, how do you adjust my, I let you go on that. He said, no! He corrected that.
Okay, our next step here. I know I got a odd piece of wood there. Doesn't seem to be the right thickness. Either that or okay, all I'm doing here is bringing this piece up to the guide. Now what you have to remember to do is to flip this thing around to the pin side, because that's the part that we're going to cut next. If you've made all the adjustments properly to this point, everything should still line up.
Same cut on both ends of one board.
No, it's two different.
Opposite ends.
Yeah. Well, no. On a given board, yeah, I understand what you said now. So on a given board, what you would do is cut the same profile on each end.
Okay.
So if you're making a bunch of these things, a dozen or something like that, you'd cut a whole bunch of tails at one time, put the board in, flip it over, and that way you won't wind up cutting the pins at the wrong angle on the wrong face. So it's pretty easy to keep track of that. When I was doing a whole bunch of drawers over at Rob's shop, I think we had about a dozen drawers to do on that assembly table. He got a real kick out of walking in the door at one point, and I was about knee deep in chips. So he proceeded to take a picture. Okay, now again, this is that piece of scrap again. I'm putting that in there to back up this cut that I'm about to make.
But it doesn't actually hit that piece, so you can use it over and over, right?
Oh, it actually cuts into it.
It does cut into it.
But
use the same end though for pins.
Yeah, you could use the same end, or if it gets pretty raggedy after, you know, not getting it just right when you put the thing in there, you just cut that off on the table saw and reuse it. Again, that's part of why I took and labeled the thing scrap, so I don't wind up cutting off the wrong thing. Okay, now that we take the other router, this one's got a straight bit on it, and it's been adjusted to the right depth already. So we will go ahead and make this cut here. Well, all I'm doing is following the template.
Yeah, the template.
So I go in on the left, come out on the right.
Yeah, okay.
Is there play between the template and the bushing?
No. I had to think about that question a moment there.
In that case, there is on the opposite side, because it's a V.
Yeah, because of this V here, I think, you know, based on what Jerry said there, I think what your question might be there is that yes, there is, because of it being a V, there is play on the open end of it. So that's why what you want to do is you want to chase the edge of that template as you go in one direction and out in the other. The reason I chose the direction that I did is to counterflow the rotation of the router bit so that it doesn't wind up, you know, trying to propel itself out.
What kind of rubber bits do you use, Bob?
These particular ones, when you buy this set, Porter Cable will send you a set of router bits with it, but it's a very common size. These particular ones that I'm using are white side. I did some research on that, and among the router bits for Dovetails, they were highly rated. I prefer using the 1/2-inch collet. It's easy. It's a whole lot more reliable for keeping that thing from becoming ballistic on you. Yeah, the cutting area is a 1/2-inch, but they also make a shank that is 1/4 inch. If you've got a choice between 1/4 and 1/2, I'll always opt for the 1/2, even though it may cost a little bit more. It's going to be a whole lot more reliable. You got 3 times the surface area for holding that thing in place. Okay, now then, if you've done everything right, what winds up happening is this thing goes together. Who needs glue? And I can see, based on this, I can see I do need to make an adjustment here. Something happened on the depth on this one.
Would you normally run a test piece, Bob?
Say again now?
Would you normally run a test piece?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Out of the same thickness stock.
Yeah, about 6 or 8.
Yeah. The main reason that I got all anal about doing these measurements and so forth is it significantly cuts down on the number of test pieces that you got to do. You might be able to get by with 1 or 2 test pieces instead of 5 or 6 when you when you're trying to do the trial and error. But other than a depth adjustment that I had for for cutting the tails there. This winds up being a pretty tight joint.
Could you make that adjustment to go back and use that same piece?
Well, these boards on the
You might be able to.
Well,
Trying to think now.
Save you from,
Yeah, Bob, these aren't the same thickness boards.
Okay. I don't know how I got these different thicknesses. Oh, I know why.
you might mention, Bob, if your depth's off, your joints will either be too tight and you can't get them together.
Yep.
Or else they'll be too loose. Now,
Oh, this is a
if they're
number-
tight, you can readjust that.
Yeah.
If they're too loose.
If you get the depth set properly on these things,
There you go.
about the only adjustment that you need to make for looseness and tightness is your guide here. You adjust that slightly in and out for making that thing tighter or looser. As a matter of fact, I think it even gives you some guidelines over here. It says to make it looser, you go in, or to make it tighter, you bring it back out.
Yeah, you shift the actual template.
Yeah, George spotted why that thing was loose. I can see now why it was done. I did my test cuts and so forth using one of the 3 boards that I bought at Home Depot, and I chose not to plane them, which I could see now was a mistake, because the ones that I did here, that was why you'll notice there was a little bit of puzzlement that I had when I stuck this gauge on there. When I adjusted the template and so forth, I adjusted it for this first board that I picked up, which turns out to be 444. These things here are 503. So that is enough to get the result that you see there. I got 2 different thicknesses of boards now.
Negative knowledge is a very valuable thing.
Which knowledge?
Negative.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's why they call it wisdom. You know, learn from your mistakes.
Trial and error.
That's
So is that
exactly why.
another night, my piece is wisdom is what you learned 5 minutes after you needed it?
Yeah. That's why I went out and bought another router, so I didn't have to keep changing bushings and bits. You know, you really need 2 routers to do that
Yep.
effectively.
Yeah, when I first got teamed up with Porter Cable to do some demos out there at one of the tent sales, they said, "Oh, we want you to cut some dovetails." Oh, okay, you know, we'll give you this jig, and you know, I already had a router, so I'm out there, and I soon realized, dang, you need 2 different bits to do these true dovetails, and a lot of adjustments. So I went in the store and said, "I'm going to need another router." And the Porter Cable guy says, "Here, I'll give you one of mine." So that's why I went up with 2 of these things.
Well, otherwise, it's too big a pain to keep changing those bits and changing those bushings. And like
Yep.
I said, I forgot to put the bushing on one time.
Yes. Looked like you had a question, Gary.
Do you intentionally make yours a little deep, or a little longer so you can sand it smooth?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, I keep it proud by, you know, 3 or 4 thousandths so you can sand it off, get a nice edge on there. Yes, Gary.
That old template that you had right there, I noticed the long slot that's in the middle of it.
Yes.
Most people may not realize that that's for doing a sliding dovetail joint too.
Right.
And a whole nother setup there, because you got to do a,
That's pretty good.
it's kind of like the dado, but the thing locks in. And you have to set the thing up to where you're doing at 7 degrees on both ends of a board, and have, like, I guess, a table mounted router to do your sliding joint in what the board's going to do.
You know what Gary's talking about here, is this jig here, where this slot is inside here for doing a sliding dovetail. I've only had a couple of occasions where I've been able to use this jig for that. Most of the applications that I come up with where I want to do a sliding dovetail like that, either the board's too wide or, you know, a number of different factors that the jig doesn't work.
Well, you could do a sliding dovetail totally on a table router if you wanted to, because all you have to
Yep.
do is get that, you know, cut on one side and then cut on the other side and get the thickness right.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to have that to do it.
But what I find works quite well for my applications is when you're faced with doing that, is I'll go ahead and use some of those edge clamps, you know, the kinds that grabs a hold of both edges of the board, you know, big long clamp. Slide those things together. You'd use two of them, slide them together so that they're parallel and the same width as what you want, you know, clamp them down so that they won't move, because that's the one thing that you'll usually have trouble with. Usually what I'll do is I will slide both of the clamps up against the bushing on the router, so that winds up being your guide on one end, then move it down to the other end, slide it together, and then clamp it in place. Then you can run your dovetail bit, your 7-degree bit, you know, for as long as you want. A lot of times what will wind up happening is I need to cut dovetails, you know, a sliding dovetail that's longer than this. So that's the way I'll do that. Yes, sir.
Would it be practical to put two boards in there and do them at the same time?
You mean one on each side?
From both ends?
You could.
Good.
Yeah, bear in mind this is a 16-inch device, so if you can keep the aggregate distance under 16 inches,
you could set it up and do it.
You could set it up and do it that way, yeah.
But you have to be careful in your starting point for each board.
Yeah.
So if your tails can be off a little bit if you're not setting.
Yeah, you've got the additional challenge in that you got to have this stop on this side set mirror image to the stop on this side, down to about 1/1000 of an inch.
That's close.
That's why I usually use one. Set one and stick with it.
What I've read and seen demonstrated is whenever you're doing two ends like that, you do one end on the left side and the other end on the right side, especially if you're doing one that's off center. And that way you'll be able to get them both at the right distance, because, you know, they're going to have, like if you're not doing the same depth, like your edge key may be a little bit deeper on one side because maybe you want to do a dado on the bottom. And you set it up to where you get your height off the top of the board on each side of it. And that way you're not having to readjust it to get the thing in the right place.
That's a way to do it, but I you know, I usually prefer to you know, decide on the you know, if I'm making new stuff from scratch or something like that, I will usually design the, you know, the drawer height to accommodate the gauge. You know, just like I'm doing a cabinet that Rob wanted, and I just decided, okay, the height of the drawer is gonna, you know, I got an 8-inch cavity to fit it in, so the height of the drawer was gonna be, I think it was 7.5, you know, so that we got a 1/2 inch above for clearance for the hardware and all that kind of thing. So I just designed the drawer to fit the gauge. Now, if you've got a situation where you're making a repair to a piece of furniture, you got a piece of existing furniture that you need to make a new drawer for, yeah, you'd probably have to do something like what you described. But then if you're making one, that's why I'm kind of anxious to see what Ken's got to say here. If you're doing a onesie, a hand-cut dovetail might be the faster way to go. Because it's going to take you, to do one drawer, it's going to take you several hours to get this thing set up right to do one. But if you're going to do 12 or 16 drawers or something like that, once you get this thing set up, you just proceed to start cranking them out. When the pile of dust gets so high that you can't climb out for lunch, then, then you know it's time to quit.
Does that system have a different degree on your blind dovetails, do you have a 14 along with your 7?
I've only seen them come in 2 sizes. It's 7 and 9.
Okay.
I think that was it, depending on the type of wood that you're using. I think for a soft wood, they recommend a 9-degree angle. For a real hard wood, the 7 degree is usually adequate.
Okay.
Well, that'd go along with your temp. You have to have for that particular template. So
No, you'd use the same template for both bits.
no.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll turn it over to Ken here.
Don't screw it.
See if Rob can get me loose here so we can get Ken mic'd up here.
I was gonna say, there was 21 drawers on that,
Oh, is that what it was? Huh?
assembly table.
Yep.
How do I do this?
Let's see, let me get Dan to hook you up in the front here.
Belt, band.
We'll clip the mic first. This. Get your hand out of the way there.
All right.
This so it keeps that cord out of your way. There you go.
I'm ready to go, huh? Okay. We must have a lot of engineers in here today.
Listen up.
That's all right. How many of you guys have cut a hand dovetail by hand? I thought so. And
Did I miss the hands raising?
this is going to be interesting. Well, obviously there's a big difference between hand-cut dovetails and using a router. And as Bob aptly demonstrated, if I was going to do 30 drawers for a cabinet, I'd use a router. The reason that I went to hand-cut dovetails, do we have my little...
Oh yeah, let me get that started for you.
I wanted to show you why I decided I wanted to learn how to hand-cut dovetails, and while he's getting that set up, as many of you know, if you've listened to a couple of talks I've given here, I'm an ex-tool collector, and when I got out of that, I decided I would get into woodworking, and I was incredibly impressed with the English and early American cabinet makers' tool chests. And they are constructed primarily of dovetails, and obviously back then they couldn't plug a router in, so they did them by hand. And I got fascinated with this. And when I first started, some of my dovetails were incredibly bad. And what I found out was one of the reasons, well, it takes patience. You have to have a desire to make hand-cut dovetails because, frankly, they're not easy. They're like watching a guy turn who's a master at it. You think, I could do that. Well, you can't do that. Or if you are a golfer, you know, you're out watching a pro swing a club and you think, I can do that. Well, you can't do that because he's hit 1,000 golf balls a day. And hand-cut dovetails are like that. If you want to bring them to a certain level, there are things that you have to learn that are outside of the zone that you normally think in, and those are some of the nuances that I'm going to talk to you about. Got that thing plugged in? Okay, why cut hand dovetails? Just punch the next one. We're going to go through this fairly quickly. I build turn-of-the-century tool chests. And every one of those things takes me about a year, and every one has about 200 hand-cut dovetails in it. You could run over it with a steamroller. That's the only way you're going to break that thing apart. And that's why it was done in the old days, because they held a lot of tools. They were really heavy. So they had to make them so they didn't come apart. Next one, just another chest. Go ahead. These chests are made up, obviously, of a case, and those bands around it are called plinths, and they're also dovetailed. The case is also dovetailed, which you're going to see shortly. The drawers are dovetailed. Not only is that utilitarian, that's a sawtill, but it has a certain beauty to it. If you flip to the next one, can't do that on a jig. If you notice right at the top of the dovetail, that little fine spot where the walnut, well, that's Indian rosewood there, but it gives it a certain beauty, and it's also utilitarian. It will hold that case together under almost any circumstances. Go ahead. I have a couple of saws here. I'll talk about those. Just to give you kind of a visual idea of what it looks like. Go ahead. That's one of the chests that I made. There's 10. Those are called tails because they're devil tails. They're shaped like that. Go ahead. I'm laying them out and I'm cutting them. So I got 40 I got to do just to get the case together. Go ahead. Another picture. Those are the pins. And there are several ways to remove the waste. That was in the early days where it was chop, 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 chop. I must have spent hours sharpening those chisels and chop, chop, chopping. Since then I found some easier ways, which I'll just give you an idea of how I do it today. Go ahead. Those are the pins that fit into the tails. And that's it. So you get an idea of why I decided I'd go to hand-cut dovetails. Partially for beauty. I'm going to pass this around. Partially because they're utilitarian. They provide superb construction. On a chest that size with 250 pounds of tools in it, it's going to be very difficult with a 45 degree and a spline to hold that together year after year after year, and particularly out in the environment in which they were put. So I'm going to pass around. This was a dovetail I cut for you guys. It comes apart. I made two mistakes with this. The first one is I didn't practice, and I haven't cut a dovetail in 6 months. If you're going to cut dovetails and you haven't done it in a while, you need to practice with your handsaw. We'll get to that. This thing comes apart. So you can get an idea of what it looks like. The other mistake I made, and I would have talked to you about this, you want the grain direction. There's a lot to think about when you do these things. You want the grain direction running this way so that when you cut the tails proud, you can hand plane with the grain of the wood. If you go this way, obviously you're going to tear this out, and that makes you very unhappy. And as I said, and the second thing I didn't do was I didn't practice. But it didn't turn out too bad, so let's just pass that one around. I discovered this box. By the way, I'm not going to stand here and bore you to death cutting out a dovetail. I just want to kind of run through this and give you a picture of what's involved when I cut a dovetail. I made this little box. I don't even know why I made it, but I found it, and it gives you an idea of what you can do with dovetails. The pins are very, very thin in this. Will give you a certain picture. If you're into woodworking and you look at a dovetail, that's the first thing you're going to look at is how wide are the pins at the top. So, nice piece of wood, by the way. Let's just pass that one around.
Why do you want to go with such thin pins?
Thin pins. Historically, the French and Federal furniture, and I'm not an expert on this history, but but I'll talk to you a little bit about federal furniture a little bit. It was a sign of craftsmanship. The people that bought that furniture, 1850, were generally wealthy merchants. And how do I put this? The skill level with which this stuff was built was absolutely superb, considering they didn't have mechanical tools back then. There weren't any calipers. You know, my problem with a caliper, not being an engineer, if it says 15-30 seconds, I don't know what the hell that means. I go to ask me and tell it to convert it to inches, and what's it do? Gives me a fraction. You know, so we're going to talk a little bit about laying out. There's a beauty, I think, with those kinds of dovetails. The drawer up there as an example, the dovetails are real fine in that. I also put a piece of what they call cock bead around that. The cock bead was put around the drawer if it was veneered on the face, and what that cock bead did is it protected the edges of the wood. So when you open the drawer, you get this visual picture. Normally, you would have a face that's dark wood, and you would use some kind of secondary to be lighter. So you have these contrasts. And if you look at old furniture, particularly in the Hipplewhite period, the contrasts were incredible. They were almost gauche in some cases. But I wanted to do it the old-fashioned way, so that's how I got into hand-cut dovetails. So we got to talk just a little bit about tools. Anybody use a handsaw? You use a handsaw, right? Anybody else? Back there. Anybody know how to tell if that handsaw is sharp? Okay. The way you can tell is this. I brought two here. This is the one I use all the time. It has certain features which I really won't bore you with. But the way to tell if a handsaw is sharp is not to run your fingers up the side of it. That doesn't tell you anything. You want to look at the top of the tooth, and you have to get the light to reflect just right. And then what you'll see is this. Your tooth, a sharp tooth, looks like that, and the top doesn't reflect light. A duller tooth, when you get it just right, will look like it's got a little ball right on the top of it. And that tells you that your saw is getting dull. In order to hand cut dovetails or do any hand cutting on wood, you have to have a sharp saw and sharp chisels. I like the word scary sharp, but unfortunately Mickey Hudspeth coined that phrase, and he's patented it. So I can't use it anymore. So I just say you need to have it really, 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 really sharp. We'll talk about that in a second. So I'm going to pass my saw. This is my saw, and I need to fettle it. I need to retune it. I need to resharpen it. We're not going to get into the ergonomics of this saw, but see if you can. There are some dull spots on this. It cuts great, but there's some dull spots. We'll pass that one around. This is a saw. Well, I was going to pass this around, but I don't think it's really necessary. A friend of mine makes saws, so he made two for me, rip and a crosscut. Dovetail saws are rip saws. They cut width down the length of the wood. They cut the soda straws in that direction. This one actually has never been used, and the points on it are really sharp. That's all that I'm passing around. I paid $250 for that thing. But it helped me become far more proficient in hand cutting dovetails immediately because of some characteristics of the saw. Now that I know how to really hand cut a dovetail, I probably don't need that saw anymore, and something like a good $65 Veritas or $120 Lee Nielsen. This one I'm passing around was made by Rob Cosman. I call that my toilet bowl saw because it's got a toilet bowl handle on it, made out of corian. So if you guys run out there and say, I'm going to get on eBay and buy me a tenon saw, probably not a really superb idea unless you know something about saws, you know something about sharpening, rake angles, and all that good stuff. The reason I paid $100 for this is because I cut a lot of dovetails. And what it does over the $20 one, got a cam up here. When you pull that cam down, you can put a lot of pressure. Is this called the beam? Back of the saw blade? Anyway, it doesn't flex very much. And you can turn that blade so that you can get in and cut waste out like this. That's why I have the expensive one.
How much do you pay?
$100. And if you have deep pockets and you want one made out of titanium, about $250. And then they've got a new one out that's bigger. Bigger is better. I don't agree with that, but bigger is better. They really cost a lot of money. I don't even look at the prices on those.
I can hear the wheels turning in George's head over here. He's thinking that looks just like a scroll saw. He's going to try doing some dovetails on a scroll saw.
Well, you know what?
The week is out.
Yeah, I cut the waste out, particularly on the tails, with a scroll saw because it's fast. Fast is not an operative word in my vernacular. I don't like that word, fast. It's faster if you do it this way. That's not the answer if you want to do hand-cut work. I think you even have to get in a frame of mind in order to do it. Sometimes I'll go down into my basement and I'm going to do some reasonably complex thing or like doing an inlay, and I just, you know, I'll turn around and say, I just don't feel like this. You know, I'll go back upstairs. You've got to get in a frame of mind to do this kind of thing. And you need some tools. Sharp chisels. You need a scoring knife, a marking knife. If you guys aren't into this, you'll make a run to Dick Blick on this one. That's a 5mm lead in this thing. It's really super fine. You want a hard lead. I found that when you're trying to make a, quote, perfect joint, you need to have really fine lines to cut. If you use a pencil, what's that about? Anybody? Pencil width? Sir? It's wide. Yeah, I think it's about 5/1000ths of an inch. I heard that somewhere. When you're cutting the pins for your dovetails, that's the hard part of cutting a dovetail, by the way. You want to score it. And I'm going to show you how you use that to cut a good dovetail. So you need two calipers. If you're going to do a lot of these, you set one of them for the shoulder. That's probably, most of mine are 1/4 of an inch. And then you use your other one where you've divided up the width of the board so that you get these little fine pins and tail openings. I'll show you how to do that on the board. You need I call this a butter knife. For you guys who are putting those dovetails together, this butter knife right here versus the typical paintbrush that you use, this thing is sloppy. This thing right here, you can put some butter on both sides, and the bottom isn't good for holding, although I put a little down there so that when I draw them up, if there is any kind of a crack in there, the glue tends to make it disappear. I cheat just a hair that way. I'm going to show you how to use this thing.
You're using the glue mostly for filler on the end grain.
Actually, if I've done it right, I won't need a filler. And while I'm thinking about that, when you're cutting these dovetails and you haven't cleaned out the bottom of the dovetail, or you've made a mistake with your chisel and you got a little gap there, and the tendency is to go get the clamp and put 10,000 pounds of force on it. Well, what happens is you will rack the piece. I guarantee it. Everybody know what I'm talking about there? Racking. You rack the piece, so when you put all 4 pieces together, one corner of that thing sticks up off of your flat table. Make sense? Yeah. Okay, so you need a good plane. I think I'm going to go into this right now. Oh, will you give me that piece over there? Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and glue this thing up for you. Because I want to use this plane to show you how to, when you get this all done, the way I finish, for instance, if I want to finish a panel or I want to finish anything, I don't use a scraper, I don't use sandpaper, I use my hand plane. So your hand plane's got to be capable of taking off, in many cases I'll take off a half a thousandths. What's 1,000 is 001? What's a half a thousandth? 0.005. Yes. You can tell I am really sharp in that area. And what that'll do is it will give you a surface. If you hold it up and you have a rake angle on it, it will give you a surface you can't get any other way. And that's how some of my buddies who are master woodworkers, that's how they do their federal furniture, like the top of a table, or the top of a chest, or secretary, and so forth. So I'm going to take this apart, glue it up for you. You can see my butter knife. I was going to borrow Bob's shirt, but I think that'll work better. Where's his hammer? I use instead of one of those really cool turned carver's mallets, you know, they really looks good when you're banging away like that if you're taking photographs. I just have an old Stanley hammer that has phenolic ends on each end. For some reason it's got that good feel, and I use that to tap these things with. So let's glue this sucker up. What did I do with it? All right, put some glue on your butter knife. This one. Anybody ever see this done before? This is good for all kinds of joints. All right, once more. And
I don't know if that's a Rob Austin approved method of doing that or not.
You got to squirt it on, let it drip off.
it's a Rob, I got this from Rob Cosman. And you
Rob
can
kind of maintains if there's any glue left in that bottle you haven't used enough.
I was going to make some smart remarks about his dovetail templates, but he's bigger than I am, so I'm going to stay away from that. I generally have some water and wipe the rag off. Where's my... There it is. And normally, I'd put a little bit on each shoulder and a little bit on each side. I hardly recommend that you put some glue on all surfaces so that you get a real good adhesion, but in the interest of time, and by the way, you take a chisel when you got this done and you cut a little bevel on each side. And what that does is if you got a nice dovetail, it keeps you from breaking this wood. It's going to be, it's not an area that it shows, but it can inhibit the tails from going down into the pins. It also forces the glue to, so, and normally what I'd do is chuck it up in a vise and then use a hammer and 90 degrees. All right, and give it a tap. Now that's not long enough, but I'm going to use it as an example. Okay, in a minute I'll pass it back around. You can stand on it. As a matter of fact, I'll invite you, if you want to, don't fall, to put it down on the floor and put one foot on it and stand up. I don't think it'll break. So before we do that, any questions?
The saw that you're passing out cuts on the push stroke. Is that the way all dovetail saws?
All American saws. The reason I don't advocate Japanese saws, there's a couple of reasons. I've used them, particularly one called a Dozuki in my early days. Actually, I tried a hacksaw one time too. I tried several different types of saws early on. If you want to use a Japanese saw, you got to use it for everything, because I'm going to show you here in a minute that the position of your body, the mind, the eye, the hand, how you stand is very important when you're using a saw, and that you're going to let the saw do the work. A Japanese saw is on the pull, obviously, and it is really sharp. It's also very flexible. It also was really designed for softer woods, because most of the woods in Japan are of a softer nature than red oak or some of the stuff that we use in this country. That and the fact that you can't resharpen the blades as far as I know, so they're throwaways, you know, they're like razor blades. Am I right on this?
I've never used a Japanese saw.
Okay. Listen, anybody that has a comment or has something that where you have a difference of opinion, please feel free to voice it, because that's how we learn. That's how I learn.
Now, on those, somebody was pointing out the thinness of it. Is the strength compromised at all, or is it? If it gets thicker, does it become weaker? Is it stronger by being thinner?
That's a good question. I can't see where it makes a difference. Structurally, it's got to make a difference. I'm sure that we've got a couple of mechanical or civil engineers in here that could figure that out, and I guarantee you there have been articles written about that very same thing. But we're not building a bridge out of wood. You know, we're building a box, and all we want is that box to end up square, so that when we bone it, you know, we're not out of alignment, and it has a lot of strength.
I think the only reason for thin pins is a visual thing.
You're absolutely right. It's a visual thing. If you really want to do one that's hard, you do what they call an English style. That's where this part right here, the pin, comes together at a point. That is very difficult to cut. Then I won't get into it. Okay, this thing has been going for a while. I'm going to see if I can't hand plane a little of this to give you an idea of what your planes should be able to do. So your chisels should be sharp. How do you know when they're sharp? You can do it, the way I do it is I take a notebook, I got one laying on my desk, and I just take that paper and hold it up and pull it like this and see if I can push the blade straight into it. If it cuts, it's sharp. If it doesn't cut, I hone my blades. My blade will be really sharp. But when you're paring, and you can do quite a bit of paring on dovetails, particularly if you happen to be into some wood like this. This was a booger because of the grain directions in here. It wanted to tear out all the time. You really need a sharp tool. And 3 more strokes on a strop with some green oxide makes the difference. Then you can shave with it if you want to be hairless. Or you can cut that piece of paper, which is a really good indication you've got a really super sharp edge. Any comments on that? Anybody ever done that?
Shaving your arm with a chisel's not a good idea.
Sir?
Shaving your arm with a chisel's not a good idea.
I agree with you, because if it's as sharp as I get mine, you can cut, and my skin's rotten anyway. I mean, I can tear it. Well, let's try this thing. Now I got to get it feddled because I backed the iron off. All I'm doing is moving the iron in. Must have had it backed out a bunch. How much you close the mouth, how sharp your iron is, we're just beginning to get a nick. Now, this is what I'm getting. And that's not too bad, but I wanted just a hair more than that, so I'm going to move this thing about 1/2 degree. Still need a hair more. This thing has what's called a Norris adjuster. I love it. It also has a mouth that moves back and forth. You can have a wonderfully sharp iron, but if you can't close the mouth, you can never take a shaving like this. There are reasons for that. Thank you. I'll pass this plane around. I'll back the iron up a little bit. I've got probably less than a 5/1000th of an inch clearance in here. I have brought it down to the point where you look at it and you say, how do you get a shaving through it? But you'd be surprised. How many of you ever done that? I use softwood in this, by the way, and I'm going the wrong direction, and it's fuzzing up and clogging up the mouth on this thing. I'm going to give it a... I'll tell you what, we'll turn it around and use some hardwood. One of the mistakes that are made today, you start planing and all you get is this little fuzz. And so you say to yourself, well, I don't have the iron advanced far enough. Because the bottoms are so flat today on these planes, if there are any little high spots, you're going to hit the high spots first. So you're going to get these little tiny pieces of dust. As you go down through that, all of a sudden you'll start to take a nice shaving. I don't want to bore you to death with this. Okay, you get the idea? And pass it back around, and it's now dry. When it gets back to you, you can try standing on it. You can see the shiny spots in this thing. The shiny spots are where I've actually planed the wood. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, here's my practice piece. Now I've reached a point in cutting dovetails that I can actually feel when the saw gets dull. Right now it feels pretty good. If I was going to cut if I was going to make another chest and just getting it started, I'd go to the trouble to go ahead and I'd refile the teeth on this.
You did that yourself?
Yes.
I noticed that's got finer teeth on the leading edge.
That's a good point. This is, there were some saws made in the past where they had fine teeth on the front and then they got coarser. They also had them in graduated where they started fine and they actually got heavier until it got to the toe of the plane. I'm going to show you in a minute why I like this saw and why I like that 22 teeth per inch. So, I haven't cut any dovetails in a long time. Bench height is really important. Almost everyone grips their handsaw way, way, way too tight. Who turns in here? Great. When you're turning, I realize you can't just let it float, but do you get a really hard grip, or have you taught yourself to kind of relax?
Just keep the tool anchored on the tool rest.
Okay, but if you get your muscles too tight, if you're skilled, I assume that it causes problems.
Tire you out.
Sir?
Tire you out, that's all.
Okay. Same thing's true of a handsaw. Here's how I how I practice. You want to get a good stance. You want to get not a hard grip, but a firm grip on your saw. I use my fingernail as a guide. Now what I really want to do is I want to split my 1/1000th or 2/1000th line here. So I'm going to lay my saw down here, get a good stance. By the way, my table sits about like that. It makes a big difference. All right, so here we go. What you do is you lighten up your grip, get your saw moving. Keep your saw moving. Bring your handle down right on the line. All right, now I've got a good curve started. I'm a little nervous. Now, I'm going to relax my hand a lot, not so that I lose the feel of the saw. What you're trying to do now is you're trying to let the saw do the work. Same thing's true with, I assume, your turning tool. You got to let that tool do the work or it won't do it. All right, so now I'm not pushing down on the saw, I'm just letting the saw do the work. And come over and do another one. Push it up. All right, now what happens if I get up here and I crank it like that? Well, what happens there is you create a couple of mountains. The wood becomes mountains. And now you've got to overcome that to get your saw working to make the curve. So you just want to keep your saw moving. Now if I can, I'm going to go back. These were about a little over 1/8 wide. I'm going to go back and see if I can split one. Keep the saw moving. Remember to relax the grip. Hope your stance is correct. Let the saw do the work. Let the saw do the work. Grip's relaxed. Damn, I did a good job on that. All right, so you can practice. The straight up and down cut is the hardest because that's the one you're going to use with the pins. So now that I've practiced, how do I get the dovetails? What did I do with that piece of wood? Put it right here. Okay. On a lot of my drawers, I'll actually use a piece this thick. And I'll use a half blind dovetail so that I've got the white wood contrasting with this piece. Why am I using a thick piece on the drawer? Because I want to put a piece of wood all the way around this called cock bead. But when I do that, I want to leave my beautiful dovetails showing, because it shows my skill as a woodworker. I'm not trying to brag here, I'm just telling you how woodworkers think when it comes to this stuff.
The piece you got in your hand is going to be the drawer front?
That's going to be the drawer front.
Okay.
Is that right? Yeah, that's going to be the drawer front. So I got to lay this thing out, and I'm going to use these two calipers. And this is how I'm going to do it. And I bet you engineers have got 100 ways of doing this. But I found if you can't add 2 and 2 and come up with only with 5, and I found out actually that works sometimes, you can do it this way. Let's see. Took engineering drawing one time, about 150 years ago. They were still inking drawings. Okay, that's my piece of wood. Now I want to lay this thing out. The only thing I have to ask myself is, what is the spacing that I want to use on that pin? Do I want it to be super, super, super narrow, or do I want it to be like 1/8 of an inch wide? And this is how I would do it. So I would take the little one, set it to 1/4 of an inch. Now I'm going to do several of these. If I was only going to do one, I just mark it off with my little fine pin here and a rule, my 1/4 inch. So I'm going to mark off 1/4 of an inch on each end. All right, and I want a pin that looks like this. I want it to be nice and narrow. So how do I get all that divided? So what I do is I would just open up my big long calipers, lay it right on that line and walk it down. And if I fell this far short, I would open up the calipers a little bit. The wider the board, you'll find your adjustments start to become quite fine. And then I put it back up here. I walk it back down, and this time the point comes right there. And I just repeat that process until this determines the gap of my pin. So when I get this down to 1/8, then I can lay out all of my pins, and they will look like what? If you look carefully, you can see my caliper marks. So we're going to start here. Whoa, come on, Kenny, settle down. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's my 1/4 inch mark, and I'm falling that far short of my 1/4 inch mark. And then I'm going to come back, put my point here on my 1/4 inch mark and mark off the other end, and you'll see all the little dots, and I'm going to mark those off with my very expensive marking gauges, and that's going to give me my layout. Everybody got that one? Okay, boy, you guys are quick studies. And then done that, I'm going to do the same thing over here. One thing I found when I'm doing this, yeah, I'm right. Okay, I'm just going to do this fairly crudely, where this will do. Where are you? Here. Made myself a dovetail jig. This one is, these come in 2 degrees, and I've just got a total mental block. One of them is supposed to be used for hardwoods, one of them is supposed to be used for softwoods by the gurus who you pay money to teach you that.
7 and 9.
Sir?
7 and 9.
Bingo. This one's a 7. I like the steeper slope because it gives you, it distinguishes your dovetail. As your mouth, as the top of the pin gets wider, you end up more with a blocky look. And if you're going to go all the trouble to cut them, you don't really want that look. So now we get to the saw part of this thing. One. Did I forget it? I always forget something. Yep, I definitely forgot it. A marking gauge. A marking gauge, I use a marking gauge with a wheel on it. Everybody kind of familiar with those? It's got a big wheel back here that moves up and down on a shaft, and up here you've got a really fine cutting edge. It's a round piece. What that does is that scores the wood for you. So what I would do is, if I was going to lay this piece into this piece, my score line would be as thick as this piece, right? So I'd score a line, and if this was the tail part, I'd score it all the way around. The pins you only need to do once, but the pins are going to be that thick plus a little bit for proud, so my score line is going to be across here. Okay? What time do we need to get out of here? 10 o'clock? Because I can pretty much do that. But I wanted to pass on a couple of other things to you. When you're hand cutting dovetails, as I said, it takes patience, it takes practice. I'll use this one. So if I were going to cut some tails in this thing, I'd have them laid out with this thing. And it really doesn't matter with the tails if you get them offline. By that I mean, where'd you go? Oh, it's out there somewhere. No, it's over there. I hope this guy, all I'm trying to do is just kind of paint you a picture of what goes in to cutting a good dovetail. All right, so, forgot where I was going, which is not normal for me at many times. Oh, okay, I've scored the lines. These pieces I've all pre-cut. Now, I don't think Bob mentioned it, but if you're dimensioning wood, and let's say this started off an inch thick and you want to bring it down to 5/8. You've taken a lot of wood off of both sides. Same thing's true, and stay away from softwoods. They're really hard to cut with a chisel. They're miserable. Get a good grade of poplar as a secondary wood. All right, all you old timers, I know you can empathize with me.
CRS.
Huh?
CRS.
All right, so I want to talk to you just a little bit about how you approach this. When you're cutting the pins are the hard part because they have to be the same size as the tail that you produced. And here's the problem. Each tail is slightly different than the next one. So if you cut 100, they're all going to be a hair different. Sometimes they'll be a little more than a little bit different. So your pins have to fit into the tails, which means when you mark those, I know where I was going now. When you mark those, they have to be very accurate, and your cut on the tails has to be really accurate. So Where is my chalk? Here we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of wood, the top, like that, and when we lay the tails down on top of this piece of wood, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to score that. This has two bevels, a right and a left. What you're going to end up with is a superfine line in the top of this piece of walnut. Then we're going to put the vertical lines in, and normally I also do that with my scoring device rather than a pencil. Then we're going to come back and we're going to split this scoring mark in half. The scoring mark looks like this. How am I going to do this? Yeah. Scoring mark looks like that. What we want to do, we want our saw blade to go right down through that. You say, well, that's impossible. Can't be done. No way. Well, it can. And you can get so good at this, at some point, that all comes together for you, and you no longer, you have to concentrate to do it, but it's not like the first one you cut. The common tendency of when you're cutting hand-cut dovetails, you're afraid to get and split the line. If it's a pencil line, you're afraid to do that because you're afraid you're going to cut too much out. So you say, okay, I'll cut it a little proud and I'll chisel it out. It won't work. You can pare a tiny bit out if you have a place where your pin and your tail fit a little bit tight. You can't put weld wood in them. You can't put anything in them to hide them. There is a way you can repair if you got a gap in a certain place. You can't fill them with glue and have it go away. They either fit or they don't fit. So you got to think about, you got to train your eye or to tell your mind where that line is at. Then you've got to get your saw in position. I'm going to just mark one of them real fast. Now all my tools are sharp, including this thing. You get it, by the way, it's about 50 bucks. You want a thin one if you ever buy one. Don't buy one of the thick ones because you can't get through those little tiny tops without this. So we'll take this thing right here and we'll mark this thing. Like that. Okay, now I've got that line. Sometimes, depending on the wood, I'll come up here and take my pencil, highlight that a hair. Now what I want to do is I want to split that line. So what I've got to do is I've got to tell, my eye is first has got to see where I'm going to put the saw blade. You got to remember that your saw blade has a certain thickness to it. So what you're going to try to use is the outside of the saw to split that line. You've got to get comfortable. If you get too far this way, your line is going to curve like that. My tendency is to be about 10 inches too far in this direction so that my line comes out like that on the other side. It can go down straight here, but on the other side it's out a little, which means you're going to have a fat side on one side of your pin. When you try to put that together with your tails, it ain't going to work. And if you pound it together, most of the time you can make it fit. In about 6 months you'll start to get all kinds of check marks because the wood starts to move and it splits. So you can get them too tight. You want them snug. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to split that line. Now, first thing I say is relax. Relax your hand, get your saw moving. Now, if you do this redundantly over and over, at some point what happens, it becomes a good habit. And you really don't think about relaxing or where you still have to concentrate where your saw blade's going, but it's not like it was before, if that makes any sense to you. So I'm going to get it up against my finger, shove the blade over where I think I'm splitting that line, get my saw moving, relax my hand, come straight down on the line, and let the saw do the work. Shoot, that looks pretty good. If you don't give yourself an attaboy once in a while, you know what the heck.
Everyone else is going to.
That's right. So basically, fellas, that's how you cut a hand-cut dovetail. There are lots and lots and lots of nuances in doing this. You have to learn how to feddle your plane correctly. And you have to have a plane that you can actually feddle that will allow you to take off small amounts of wood. Your chisels need to be sharp. And a lot of times, I thought for years I had a sharp chisel until somebody showed me the difference between really sharp and sharp. You need little things like a butter knife. Since I was a tool collector, I got these great pair of calipers with these super thin little points on them. They're fantastic. I just love them. You're going to have to buy a reasonably expensive saw. And if you want to get serious, you're going to have to get someone to teach you how to file your saw. And the first couple of times you do it, I suggest you buy a really cheap one. It looks easy, but it's kind of like cutting over here. You've got to keep the file a certain way. You've got to stand a certain way. Your eye has to see a certain thing. It takes patience and it takes practice. I can do one now probably, I take my time in about 30 minutes. So, we'll leave it there.
I was going to ask about how you remove the waste in the bottom of the dovetail. I just started to play around with a jeweler's saw, and which is very similar to the red saw you had. But can you turn the corner down in the bottom of that?
Sure. I have a really fine curved saw. I tried something the other day that I wouldn't have believed. There's a round saw blade out that's really fine, and if that will fit down in your saw kerf, you can use that.
Would that be a spiral blade?
Yeah,